of Alarm Clock. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. If it's not your first time and you've been here before, well, welcome back. We've been really enthused by the feedback that we've been getting from our viewers. We like to call you affectionately our clockers, who tune in. You send your questions, you send your suggestions, things that you want to know more information about. We are so happy that you are engaged and you want to learn more about politics and governance in St. Kitts and Nevis. That is the objective of the show, to give people the information in a very simple, casual way as best as possible so that people increase their understanding of politics and governance issues around us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. I am your host today, Gian Williams, one of the co-founders of Alarm Clock, and I am joined by 4 panelists here this afternoon. And to say, of course, before we even start, to say thank you to ZIZ TV Studio for allowing us to film here this afternoon, and hopefully we can begin, strengthen the partnership here with ZIZ and other media houses. We are really enthusiastic about the support and the feedback and people willing to partner because you believe in the movement about education, about respectful conversation about politics. And so we hope that that is going to be one of the conversations that you gain from and learn from. And we always look forward to your feedback. We're streaming live on Facebook. We're streaming live on YouTube, our YouTube channel as well. And so we will just get into it. So I'll introduce the guests here first of all. This afternoon, we will be discussing good governance. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of topics happening around it. So we thought to introduce or call on the expertise and experience and opinions of people who we have seen be very vocal or knowledgeable about the issue of good governance. So on our panel here today, we'll start at my right. I always have to check that's right. Yes. We'll start at the far right. We have Mr. Kenneth Bob, who's the operations manager of Sparrow Foods. Mr. Bob is a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, but
Trinidad born.
Okay. Trini petition is Bob. And so we welcome Bob this afternoon. I call him Bob. I don't have anybody calls you Kenneth?
One person, my wife.
Okay, so I have to call you Bob. All right. Okay. And next to Bob we have Leslie Joseph. Most people know her as Lexi. I'm going to try my best to call her Leslie today. She's she's a business and public relations consultant, and she joins us here. Again, someone who traditionally used to be very vocal about issues of politics and governance. Her voice is kind of missing, so we thought to bring her out of hibernation a bit and see what she could add to the discussion. And then on my left, we have the other co-founder of Alarm Clock, Ms. Desi Brown. She is an entrepreneur, owner of Poise SKN, but also a student of international relations and a lover of all things politics. So we will hear from Desi as a panelist today, and she is next to her. She is joined by Mr. Craig Tuckett, who is the deputy chairperson of the People's Labour Party and the deputy campaign director for Team Unity. If you're not familiar with Alarm Clock and what we try to do here, we try to bring people who understand politics, understand governance, and of course we try to do it with a very balanced panel, and one where we could get varying views so that when you listen and you walk away with the knowledge, you hear it from as many sides as possible. Our panelists are usually people, you don't have to be expressly involved in politics, so you don't have to be a member of a political party. You could have your own very strong political views. Your view on politics could be, I don't want to be on either side, but you just understand the need to discuss it. We'd like to bring those sorts of people together so that we can have really balanced and enriching discussions. So today, let's get right to it because we started a bit late and we apologize for that. We are talking about good governance. And I'm just going to let each panelist tell me in their own opinion, when we talk about good governance, what exactly do we mean? So by voluntolding, the process of voluntolding, this afternoon, Lexi apparently was the loser or the winner, so she has to go first. So Lexi, what in your mind is good governance?
Well, good afternoon to everyone listening and viewing us. First of all, I very much appreciate Gian having extended the invitation for me to be here. Yes, my voice has been somewhat missing in comparison to previous years, but I in no means have been lax in my attention. Now, with regards to governance and good governance, to my mind, good governance essentially it speaks to the manner in which an administration manages a country's government so that the majority of the people's needs are met in some way, shape, or form. The majority of the people's needs are met in some way, shape, or form. And I stress majority because I want to draw the stark distinction that I do mean the majority of the people and not just the few.
Okay. So the majority of the needs and making sure that as many persons as possible have their needs met. Bob, do you want to give us some insight into what you see as good governance?
Hi, well, thanks, Gian, for the invitation again. I only actually volunteered because normally I would only comment on Facebook and otherwise, but I only actually volunteered because I saw the need for persons like yourself to start getting more and more neutral views out there. So thanks for that, first of all. As far as good governance is concerned, now, because of your invitation, I started to do a bit more research, and maybe I should have. So there's a lot of information out there, and I do encourage persons to even just type it in your normal search engines, whether it's Google or Bing, and do a bit more research for yourself if you have to. But good governance, as Lexi was hinting, refers to it could refer to businesses, something as institutions such as small as businesses, or it could refer to government. In this instance, because of the politics of today, we are referring to government. And in doing so, we want persons to understand that it refers to how government is managed. Is it being managed fairly? Is the rule of law being applied? Is everybody able to access this government? Does everybody have a voice within this government? Does it represent the needs of the many as opposed to a few? Does it are the institutions working within serve to benefit the majority or the many as opposed to the few? What about our democratic processes, elections? How are they conducted? All of these are areas that speak to what good governance should represent. There is no clear, distinctive principle or phraseology that could define it, but it's really and truly how
efficient, and equitable. And it is inclusive to involve ensuring that the rule of law is followed and to minimize corruption. So that in itself is a lot for a description of what good governance is. The question is it achievable in our very young, fledgling democracy? Is it an ideal to aspire for? And I think that it is something that we should consider and have a discussion about. And I'm sure that persons will say, we are getting there step by step with each generation, especially with each election that we have.
Okay. So we'll definitely have that conversation, you know. Is it something that's even attainable? Is it just this utopian standard that we talk about? But we'll hopefully get everyone's views on that. Are we where we should be? Can we be further? So we'll get into that. But before we get into that, Desi, if you could just give us your thoughts on what is good governance.
All right, so I would definitely like to take this opportunity to highlight a few things, since most of my colleagues have actually identified the very similar definitions, and basically some things that I also had in mind as what I think good governance is. So I wanted to highlight that governance is different from good governance, because when we're talking about good governance, we're talking about the conduct that's the way in which business is conducted. But governance is the process of simply making decisions, those decisions and the way in which they're implemented, or implementing those decisions. And then we also look at governance from the lens of politics. And when I mean politics, we tend to put the two together, and I feel compelled to make that distinction. So politics is not about governance. It's actually about the individuals, and those individuals that create the party reinforced personalities. So it's those activities that are related to governance, such as debates and conflicts that are associated with party politics. But governance is a system, it is an institution. It relates to that the institution of government implementing, and it's now good governance for me is about outcomes and getting the work done and doing it well.
Okay. So I like that you made that distinction between politics and governance, because a lot of times I think we get that confused. So there is like the party politics that allows us to pick the persons who will join government. And then there is governance that speaks to the way that we do things as the public service and the services that the government offers. So it's interesting that you make that distinction. So today we're talking about good governance, and maybe we may even see there is too thin of a line, maybe, between politics and governance, especially in a country of this size. So what are your thoughts about good governance? Tell us what that looks like in practical terms. We could start with Desi. We could go backwards this time.
All right, so like I said, I mentioned good governance for me is about creating outcomes. We tend to vote for individuals that talk about ensuring that they're going to run government as a business, or they're going to do something that is directly related to a personal feeling or a private attribute. When we look at governance, we're looking at public goods and the stewardship of how those public goods are being managed and executed. So in real life, we're looking at how are we creating systems to effectively educate our population. So you're looking at a pothole has nothing to do with party politics. Roads, so that's roads and infrastructure. You're looking at what laws are we putting in place. So we had the Integrity of Public Life Bill, and are they being activated? Are they being activated, and are we holding people accountable for the way in which it is being activated? So when I think about the practicality, we're thinking about that mutual contract that citizens have with the government, and that contract is mutually reinforceable. So we have to hold up the ends, and if that contract is broken, then we're not really carrying out good governance. We're not seeing good governance in play. You want something, you don't say, for example, we see a lot of it happening. Persons are saying somebody may not have had enough time to execute a certain project, or you can't ask for so much because somebody only has that amount of time, but you can ask for what you want, because if it is going to benefit the public, and if it's going to help us to be able to run the country more efficiently, we're going to be transparent about it, we're going to be able to hold you accountable for it, then you can ask for it. So that mutually reinforceable contract has to be upheld on both ends, from the citizen and the government. So both parties have a role to play in ensuring that good governance is carried out.
Okay. Now, Craig, you actually mentioned 8 points, and I think that is actually a great place for us to jump off of. Efficiency, transparency, accountability, and participation. If you could just give the others, and we'll pick a couple, and we could go from there.
But first, let me say that I think a very good example of a government implementing good governance as a part of its agenda is the Team Unity administration. Our Prime Minister and political leader, the Honorable Dr. Timothy Harris, is a stickler for following as a map the science or the professional advice of established institutions, such as the United Nations. And so if I recall, bring to your recollection the 8 characteristics of good governance, one of which is participation. It's basically involving the general public or the masses in the decision-making process. That's why in the first year of the Team Unity administration, you remember we had a series of town hall meetings. Town hall meetings to address the issue of constitutional reform, town hall meetings to address the issue of even good governance in terms of the three legislative agenda in terms of the Freedom of Information Act, accountability in terms of, give me the other one again, you just mentioned it.
Efficiency?
No, in terms of the legislation. We had the
Freedom of Information, integrity
in public life.
Yeah.
And then we had also the implementation, finally, of those two legislative items by having them actually fleshed out. The introduction of the person who will be charged with the commission and also the office, the fulfillment of that office. So you have the participation from the government with the public, ensuring that they are involved in the decision-making process. Transparency. We have, again, through the Team Unity administration, have had the opportunity for persons to come to the general public, come to the general public by asking them their information, ask them information from them, what it is they would like to see done by the government. That is also an opportunity for participation. But in transparency, we see where they, as a government, opened up the necessary files or the necessary legislative processes so that the persons who would like information can get that information freely. We also saw, for the first time, such as in ZIZ, the opportunity for all political parties to participate in disseminating their political agenda or political philosophies, and that is a part of transparency. So again, the government has been showing that ability to have a good governance agenda. You have the responsiveness of the government, where after having that interaction with the participants in town hall meetings, they have the implementation of the ideas that were brought to them. So they show that they are listening to the general public and implementing them, whether it be through legislation or policy or programs. And of course, the rule of law, following the Constitution. This is what this government has been doing. We've been following the Constitution in relation to ensuring that we have a Deputy Speaker of the House. We make sure that we have the following of the time where we should have elections. We make sure that we follow the law in relation to the health and security and safety measures for the general public as relates to the COVID-19. These are just few of the ideas and few of the programs, policies, and the agenda of the government to ensure that they have indeed a very effective good governance agenda.
Okay. We'll come back to that because we're just laying the foundation here about what it is so that people understand clearly what we're talking about, because we especially for this election cycle, we're hearing a lot about good governance agenda. So we want to make sure people understand. Bob, in practical terms, everyday terms, how do we interact with good governance?
Gian, okay, so one of the more topical issues as it relates, because in tech, as we've identified, there are a lot of principles more so than just one set factor. But something that we can all relate to, for example, as I could think is almost international in recognition, is the campaign finance legislation. Practically every first, second, third world country has the intention of implementing some form of campaign finance legislation. Trinidad and Tobago, I think, has been one of the first Caribbean countries to recently do so. Once we start putting these things in place, or once we start having these institutions operationalized, because it's okay to have the legislation. For example, the Procurement Act was sent into legislation in 2012, I believe, and the Procurement Act refers to how we sign contracts or tenders to do government business. Mm-hmm. So as a country that's trying to develop, or as a developing country, we want to move away from the perception of giving friends jobs giving their friends contracts because they're friends. Giving somebody a contract because they're a family member and they can benefit, not necessarily because they are the best or the most qualified to do it, or they've sent in the best tender. Most governments tend to move away from that type of operation, especially as it comes to procuring work to be done. You have the Procurement Act. How are you actualizing what is written within the Procurement Act as an administration? That's where we start to question now the governance. Is it done in a transparent way where persons can see when the tenders are going out? They can participate if they so desire, but at least the country can be involved as well as communicated to. So those are just two maybe practical examples that we can use for now in terms of what we refer to as good governance and how a government has direct impact on us and our everyday life as it relates to utilizing the factors of good governance or not doing so.
Okay. Lexi?
Yes, so I would prefer not to look to international definitions with regards to defining what good governance should be, because while the definitions, they do pan out in theory, I realize that they cannot all be applied to us as static as they are. One aspect that I believe belongs or is found in good governance is an administration's ability and possession of an innate understanding of its people and its culture, the people who elected them to govern. Our people, for example, have an idea, a concept of fairness. And when something does not look fair to them, you're gonna get some backlash. Now, this is not to say that what you're doing is actually unfair. But what this speaks to is how the administration communicates its actions to the public so that at the end of them speaking and saying what they're doing, the people have very few questions, if any at all. Of course, you're gonna have people who are gonna want to know more things, but insofar as possible, there should be a very strong effort made to ensure that you can actually predict the basic questions people are going to have about what you're doing so that you can answer them even before they're asked.
But if we listen to what Craig said before, he mentioned Freedom of Information Act. So you now have legislation in place where people can go and ask questions. You have a right now, legally, to go and ask questions. So if you want to know how much money was spent on a project, once, I believe there are some exceptions in the Act, right,
That's
Craig?
correct,
Yes. So there are exceptions in the Act. Once it doesn't fall within the exceptions, then you are free to go and ask for this information. But I think what came to mind when you were speaking for me about fairness is, you know, is the process accessible? And will people, is it an issue that people won't go? Do you think it's the government's role to ensure that people, is it their role to just make it easy for them to access it? Or do they should they be pushing people to seek out this information?
If I could add here, and that's what I was speaking about when you asked me, how do you see it working, is that's when I mentioned that contract. It's, even though it's a government responsibility to be able to carry out that good governance agenda or manage the public good in a way that it is considered to be exceptional, and we're creating those outcomes that includes everyone, including the minority, including vulnerability. It's our responsibility as citizens, and we refer to that as our citizenship, our right and our responsibility to hold the government accountable. So if you need to get information from your government, you have to ask for it. And sometimes they're not going to give you everything, but to hold them accountable, to ensure that they're transparent, you have a right to ask those questions and ensure that you're getting the information that you need, that they're covering all of their bases, because these are, when we talk about measuring good governance, those 8 areas that Craig mentioned were good measuring sticks. Are you being transparent? Are you following the rule of law? Are you being efficient and effective? Are you falling into, are we holding the government accountable? So when you ask the question, if it's the responsibility of the government to ensure persons know or have information, we also have to ask of them to present that information.
So the government has a role to make sure that the information is accessible. But we also have a role in making sure that we access
the information.
Correct.
Yeah. I would like to add to that, Janine. As Desi had mentioned, yes, a part of the democratic process in terms of ensuring a particular country has the government that it so deserves, they are faced with promises, a social contract. That social contract is also a guide by which people can determine if the government of the day has been truly practicing good governance. I would like to say, in relation to the Team Unity administration, in 2015, all of our, I would say not all, I thought that would be facetious for me, 95% of our campaign promises have been met, and we have even implemented policies, programs, and projects that were not even promised in the campaign. And that is why we are seeing, we are offered to persons a fair share for all. That's a part of the equitable part of being a good government, and also practicing good governance, and also inclusivity. Because we did not decide we're going to just give our supporters alone. We're not going to just give those who are in Sengis alone. We stretched across to Nevis. We have a better relationship with Nevis, and the people of Nevis. We have made sure that it doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. You get the benefits of our roof rehabilitation program, of a poverty alleviation program. You have gotten benefits to scholarships for young people, for even a house, or owning your own piece of land, a piece of the rock. So this also shows the inclusivity and also the equity as a part or characteristics of good governance. And like I said in my earlier statement, I think Team Unity has shown that as being an exemplary government and having its agenda in terms of good governance.
Okay, so Craig, essentially you would give the Team Unity Administration an A+.
A plus.
For good governance.
A plus.
Yes, Bob? We'll come back to that.
Let me just correct one piece of information. The Freedom of Information Act has not yet been operationalized. So in truth, we do have these, like I suspected, we do have these laws. Some of them were written into, but they have not yet been operationalized. Similarly with the the Integrity Life legislation, that has been written and I think passed as far as the last, but the actual operationalization of these institutions that would actually give this entire legislation teeth, these things have not been done. So, I mean, again, that comes down to the transparency of the entire process. I want to agree and I want to give you your credit for suggesting that these things have been passed and they may not have been passed before despite us being here before. But if you're going to pass them and if you're going to take credit for passing them, then you also have to show us the operationalization of these things and showing them being put to work so that the people can see persons in government or otherwise being held accountable. And we, as you asked, the information that you are currently asking for, or Desi was referring to earlier, is actually available for you guys to scrutinize and to truly judge whatever administration is in power, truly judge their performance and not just have the laws there because we say we have them.
Well, I wouldn't want to say that we just have them on the books. I do believe that this administration, having passed the trilogy of legislation in regards to good governance, have already started to put them into place, to flesh them out. The challenge that we have faced, or we are faced with presently, is to ensure that the general public is affair with how they can access. I think it's just a process now of having a series of educational series, whether it be town hall, more town hall meetings as we've been having before, or having an opportunity to have little cottage type meetings within the community or in the constituencies, and think from there we'll see the total implementation of the legislation. But it cannot be taken away that this was on the tables for 10 years as a country, but it took the Team Unity administration to make it happen.
Well, but make it happen, you mean pass it. So you took it one step further. It's still not operationalized though, so we still can't access.
But we do have a commissioner. We have appointed a commissioner in relation to the freedom of information. We have the office that is presently in use. So it now takes the people to access, to start to actually put it into practice. It takes people to go forward and say, I would like this piece of information. And from there, the information will be had.
Well,
what is concerning, though, in relation to the integrity in public life, we have seen...
Oh, and somebody asked, what is that? So if you could explain what that legislation seeks to do. The integrity in public life.
Right, so it tries to ensure that persons who have been either elected or appointed to any aspect of the executive branch of our government, or even, I would say, the legislative as well,
above a certain level,
are not enriching themselves through the use or abuse of their power or their office. And that can be checked by their annual submissions of their income, of their assets. And this needs to be, I would say, implemented by both sides. As I recall, there was an attempt by our administration to ask the opposition to get involved and let us do it all together. They recanted, and so therefore that aspect of the legislation is still yet to be implemented. But I'm speaking now just as a citizen. I would like to see this done. I myself, in my position, wherever I am, whatever influence I have, I will definitely try to lobby for such to be implemented, because I think it would only take our country forward.
But Craig, you know, you're obviously, everybody could tell from the T-shirt and the description of your titles, you support the Team Unity administration. So your input here this afternoon, we don't really, I want to say that it will, of course, be very flattering. And you asked us to be honest, but you asked us to be kind. Yeah. But I want to know, how would you respond to the thinking that the Team Unity government was elected to office in 2015?
Correct.
the good governance agenda was a significant part of the promises. But here we are, 5 days, a few days before elections, and the court ruling that ZIZ had to allow free access, and that's something that you highlighted as one of the tenets or one of the examples of good governance. But we can't ignore the fact that this had to be the result of a legal challenge.
Well, let me respond to that. Again, the ZIZ Broadcasting Corporation is a state-owned entity led ably by a board and chaired by Mr. Lester Hanley. I was made to understand that this policy that was adopted by the court in its order was already in place. It was already in place. It was also given some more impetus based on the fact that the injunction was indeed put forward, but it was in place, and this was also a promise that was made by this administration. And truth be told, we are happy that it has come to this point, because now everyone will benefit. The country will benefit. This is something that we ourselves, this is something that we ourselves could not get when the Honorable Sam Condor wished to have access to the ZIZ Broadcasting Corporation, and he was denied by a chairman less than 5 years ago. And so what we're seeing now, where we can have the former leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition and former parliamentary representative of Constituency Number 6, he can now have access to the ZIZ radio and television freely. That cannot be denied as being a part of the agenda for good governance, which, though it took a court challenge, the policy was already in place.
The policy wasn't implemented, though.
Again, it could only be implemented when elections are near. And now elections are. And now elections are near, because that is the impetus. The people have to lobby for the time. They never put forth, based on all information, a request to use the services and the platforms of the ZIZ. But
opposition parties will always be in a position to impart information, regardless of not if it's election time.
They have never been asked, and they have never been denied. We can say we have asked and were denied. We were denied just prior to the 2015 elections. It was a fiasco. But based on that experience, we said we want to have that changed. It was a policy that was produced by the board. It was put forward. There was discussions even before the injunction, and it has been implemented by the court. We are happy for that to happen, and now we can move forward.
I'm a bit confused, I'm sorry, because Mr. Tuckett, you're saying that it was a policy that the Team Unity tripartite coalition said they wanted as a part of their good governance agenda, but yet it took a court injunction to have you all, implement this policy that was a part of your good governance agenda? Was the court influence always factored in with respect to this particular issue in the administration's good governance agenda?
Right. I'm saying
I'm a bit confused because you seem to be
I'm trying to explain.
Bouncing between the.
No, what I'm trying to say is this. The policy was there. It just took for the opposition to ask. They never did ask. But what happened is that they took the time, this period of time, to use and score political points. If they had asked and they were denied, they would have validity in their legal action. It was never such. But so, because of the, as people like to say, silly season, they put forth a litigation, a civil suit for injunction, and it was pacified. It was addressed because the court used the same policy that was developed by the same board, which was waiting for anyone to ask for the use of the services of ZIZ, and then it was implemented. And so, therefore, all benefited. How can that be any different from us saying we wanted to have a serious transparency of an accessibility and inclusiveness of the use of state-owned resources, and that is why we were happy for the ruling of the order of the court, because it just showed that what the court used was a policy that we already implemented, and we were indeed fulfilling the things.
Pretty certain the court is not led by ZIZ policy.
I'm saying that it is the policy. Well, I tend to differ.
I really
Allow-
want to believe that the court is not led
Allow, if you could allow me,
led by legal principles of fairness and democracy as enshrined in the
I agree, but the policy or the orders 3 and 4 of the court were based on fleshing out further, of course, the policy that was implemented in preparation for elections and were given free and fair equitable access to the state-owned resources, which is the ZIZ Broadcasting Company.
let me correct the record, just one thing. As far as the opposition correspondence is indicated, they did send 2 letters to the ZIZ board in order to acquire the necessary access, but were denied on both occasions.
When
Which
was
was,
that?
well, what we can do is refer to the documents filed by the applicants. And what I would suggest you do is refer to the documents filed by the applicants and necessarily read them, as opposed to just hear what you may have thought you heard. But as far as I'm aware, part of the application did indicate that access was asked for, and it was denied based on the fact that there was scheduling conflicts with the COVID-19 task team, if I'm correct, and some other government held. But that's what I don't want us to do, though, is to get carried away with the politics, because I remember Desi initially saying that there's a conflagration of the two, and I don't want us to get carried away with the politics of it, because I don't think that would be as helpful as if we were to bring it back to understand what the requirements are in terms of what we need to see, not just us here, but country needs to see as practices of good governance, and what practices maybe we need to put away and demand that our leaders put away, and then start charting maybe a new course, maybe a new discourse, because a lot of times what we find ourselves doing, because of this very tribal political atmosphere that we have in St. Kitts, based on the very nature of that atmosphere, it causes persons to either fall on the wrong side of what good governance is. And I say that to say this. Owen Arthur made a comment some time ago as it relates to this matter of governance, and maybe if you could allow me to quote briefly, it's a pretty long comment, but he says that the unfortunate aspect of the Westminster model of governance is that it encouraged to the victors, the spoils type mentality amongst our people. So what has happened is that over time, half the population, once an election is completed, gets disenfranchised or shut off in one way or the other because of their political affiliation.
But that's not
And nowhere else we see more significance of that particular statement than perhaps in St. Kitts.
That's not true.
Once a party wins, more often than not, their persons are appointed to positions of power, positions within the executive, positions of otherwise, and there is very little inclusion of the opposition. Now, maybe this is a new dispensation in this coming up election, and both parties are now saying we want to do things differently. But I think they also need to understand that the mere nature of the divisive politics that is preached is causal to the lack of good governance that we are seeing in most of our governmental institutions. Because sometimes you put square pegs in wrong holes just because this person is a political affiliate.
Well, that is not the case.
That cannot be good for good governance in any institution or administration
But that's what I would.
Before you go, Craig, one thing we have to make exceedingly clear is that everybody has a right to their own opinion.
Agreed.
And if in one panelist's opinion it is one way, and in another panelist's opinion it's in the other way, we should be able to respect that.
No, if I may.
But I don't want us to get caught up in debating little issues and facts, because the whole purpose of this show, remember, is for people to walk away understanding what we're talking about when we talk about good governance. So whether or not somebody was denied from ZIZ, that's not really our issue. If I could use Desi's example, that's politics, we're talking about governance. So if we have to stay on track here and talk about exactly what is present, yes, And of course, politics is going to be involved, but I don't want us to get caught up in personal opinions on whether or not.
Okay. But if I may just respond, I promise this will be my last interjection we get in this matter. In the court order, the court also said that the time that's going to be allotted to each political candidate, or referred to, or it's passed on to its party, is dependent upon scheduling. So when it was clear, during a time when we were in crisis, we are experiencing a pandemic, and we were having daily broadcasts for the benefit of persons, the general populace in St. Kitts and Nevis. It is not even fathomable for any institution such as the state-owned ZIZ Broadcasting Corporation to have fit in a scheduling time for a political party or any other entity to give information or to be able to give a message during a time which was already scheduled and blocked. Now, when I said earlier they were not denied, because again, the board will have to come and will be able to give, if they so desire,
and
information.
we don't want to
and we
get
don't
into
want
that.
it. Good. But the point is, we as an administration has ensured, as a part of our good governance agenda, ZIZ is now open and has been open through the policy that we have put forward and we was going to implement, which has now been used by the court to ensure that it is fully implemented. And I'm thankful for that.
Well, Lexi wanted to chime in a while now.
Yes, I want to disagree slightly with the stance that we should separate politics from governance, because I actually don't think the two can or should be separated. Looking at our politicians, if you really pay attention, it is actually not difficult to predict or to get a general idea of what governance would be like under a particular administration based on the ways in which they politic. Classic example, and this might be a touchy topic, but I'm going to touch it. The destruction of certain politicians' political paraphernalia. I have heard one party calling for people not to do it. And I've heard nothing from another party whose people are actually the ones doing it. I would see posters up, red posters up this evening. I wake up in the morning and there's some crumpled in the bushes and the rest are missing. It's as if those who decided to rip them down took them with them. Now, I'm not going to say that they were instructed to take them down or not. I do not know that. I have no evidence of such. But the fact that civilians are going around vandalizing the political paraphernalia of certain politicians and other politicians, whether they're their political opponents or not, and not calling this out, this illegal activity, they're not saying, you know what, we need to stop, this is not what this is about. It tells me a lot about the other side who's running. You're silent in the face of illegality, regardless of the fact that this illegality may be seen as frivolous to some. It may tickle you and say, haha, they pull on his or her boards or whatever. It really should not be about that. It is something that is wrong. Right is right, wrong is wrong. If it's something that is being done by a person, whether they're your supporter or not, and you see them, you should tell them, listen, this is wrong. This is not what politics is about in St. Kitts and Nevis. At the end of the day, there are two people who are vying for the position in this constituency to be your representative in government. That is all that politics is about, because all 3,000 something or 5,000 people in a constituency cannot march into government headquarters and sit down to make a decision. You have to pick one person. We have sides to pick from. That is all. And if these sides, or if one of the two or the three sides is silent when clearly some of their supporters are engaging in vandalism of political paraphernalia and they're saying nothing, and I have to say they're saying nothing because the vandalism is public, and I think the reproach that should come, it should also be public. There's nothing. There is tombstone territory level silence on that matter.
So wrongdoing being unchecked is bad governance.
It's an indication of what governance would be like under you, this person, were you to be elected. You're clearly seeing something wrong, and you're saying nothing. To my mind, I take the stance that every mosaic, which is a painting that is made up of dots, is made up of tiny little dots, as I just said. If you remove all the dots that are one color, you have a completely different picture. So no one can tell me that, oh, it is a little thing, that's nothing. No, every little thing is a part of a big thing. Every little thing is an indication of what the big picture could or would look like in the event that this person who is silent in the face of illegality because somehow they think it works in their favor were to get elected.
Okay, Desi?
All right, so just to respectfully disagree somehow, I actually totally understand what you're saying, but that's why we marry politics and governance to create a government, right? Now, in politics, you have these individuals with the conflict, the debate, and they have problems. They're hoping to achieve power and so forth. You're dealing with individuals, and that's where we get that tribalistic attitude. And then somehow, when they're in government, you don't always get that. But when they go back onto the, say for example, they go and they give a speech to the nation, and you're not supposed to get that party politics vibe. You're supposed to get that nationalistic approach to addressing the people, right? So I did mention earlier that we do have a weird way of looking at politics and governance, because in this small space, as Gian would have said it, the lines are blurred. It's very blurred because we somehow don't understand what the concept of governance is, then good governance, and then politics. And generally speaking, coming from especially having younger persons around me, they always say they don't like politics. And I'm like, you don't have to like politics. You just need to be interested in how the country is going to be governed, right? So there are two different things. Understanding that politics and that politicking, it rubs us the wrong way because you're dealing with people trying to achieve something. They're in competition, they're contesting. So it has that negative stigma, and I understand that the way in which they represent themselves is an indication of how they can represent themselves in government. There are laws, rules, all these things, and again, as citizens in that mutually reinforcing social contract that we have with our government, we have to hold them accountable for the things that they do and they say. So it's really important for us to be able to identify that party politics does not belong in governance. And governance is supposed to function as itself. So if it is that we're having a problem today, that the lines are so blurred that we can't separate the two, that means we have a huge problem as it relates to good governance. And that's me applying good governance to St. Kitts and Nevis. If we're saying that because this person acts this way as within their party, and they represent the party this way, and we're going to expect them. No, we understand that when we vote for individuals, we're looking for qualities in individuals that's going to be able to carry out that good governance agenda. Understood. But besides that individual has to abide by the rule of law. They're not above the law in any way. We need to be able to hold people accountable to the things that they're supposed to do when they get in office, and ensure that we design the systems in a way that we can get those outcomes and that we can achieve everything that we need to achieve and do it extremely well.
No, we have to move on. Well, Craig gave his rating of the current administration as an A+ in terms of he feels as though the country is being governed well, and there are enough checks and balances in place, that we have sufficient access to information and things that people feel as though we have sufficient space to make people accountable. Now, I won't necessarily ask everybody else, because Craig is the only one here representing a political party. So I want to know, in your opinion, what are the checks and balances that are missing? Because clearly, if we're still discussing good governance and wanting good governance, we must feel as though there is not sufficiently being addressed. So what do you see as some of the checks and balances that are missing?
Okay, so maybe I can start off this by just prefacing some of the concerns that not just St. Kitts and Nevis. I should have prefaced a lot of what I said prior to that. These problems face all Caribbean countries. Some of the issues that they're currently faced with is things like the bureaucratic red tape, the difficulty of businesses to be able to conduct business in St. Kitts and Nevis. They refer to featherbedding, that is where you overstaff the state agencies with persons of a particular political affiliation. You refer to subsidies that come for businesses, but then other smaller businesses don't get those subsidies, so it's unfair trading practices. You refer to when state enterprises take up large projects and then they fail, and so there are a number of different issues that can what should I say, hinder our development. And if you're hindering our development as a smaller country, nation, then it's really not good governance we're practicing. So things we can put in place. First of all, we have to start looking at executive agencies which are managed by people who are professionals, not just individuals who are political appointees. Maybe in another discussion, I'll discuss some more as it relates to the sharing of when you're making these appointments, the sharing of the responsibility between the government and the opposition, so that these appointees don't get in there because they're political appointees. These appointees get in there because amongst our parliamentarians, we select them as the best and the most suitable persons. That tends to move us away from what you'll find a lot of partisanship within the public service. Then you have accountability. So we did mention the integrity in public life legislation and other pieces of legislation that we can put in, the procurement legislation that's already there, putting things in place to hold our leaders accountable. Then you have to look at our service as a nation. How do we, what are we doing in our public services and our administrations or public administrations to improve the service levels? So it makes it easier for you to do business as an individual, as a citizen, to get your license, to get your passports, to get any sort of information you need to get. Fair competition, I mentioned that. You need to make it a level playing field for small as well as large businesses, non-party contributors as well as persons who contribute to your party, so that persons can feel the effects. Some countries have the office of an ombudsman. So if it is a government official does something that you do not necessarily think is fair, just, you have a complaint bureau by which you can approach, and this person with the necessary legal assistance can represent on your behalf. These are certain things that we can put in place to alleviate corruption, the utilizing of the courts more, the involvement of the civil society, because usually we vote for what is reflective of us. I mean, we're all here clamoring for good governance, but then somebody even asked me today, do we really want good governance? Then I asked him the question, we may not want it, but we need it if we are going to develop the way we're supposed to develop. So in truth, by our actions though, if we analyze, do we really want good governance at a ground level, or smaller institutions reflective of good governance? Do we conduct our lives as persons with characteristics so that when we contribute to the outer society, you're encouraging principles of good governance? So yes, we tend to hold the politicians solely or most responsible, but more often than not, we get what we vote for, we get what we put there, we get what we implement ourselves, and it's usually a reflection of what we want as a people. And no matter sometimes what they do, that's how the vote tends to go.
But is it what we want, or is it what we accept? Because a part of bad governance might be that there is no space for you to adequately say what you want. And for the responsiveness, that even if you say it from now to November, that it might not come to fruition. So there are so many calls for, there have been calls for integrity in public life legislation for so long. And yes, this administration has taken it to the stage where it's now legislation. It still has no regulations, and it hasn't acted. So as far as I know, not one person has submitted a declaration of assets form. So we can't really, is it a situation where we're saying, you know, we want it, but bad governance might actually still, no matter how much you want it, you still might not get it?
Well, the only suggestion I would is that we are in a democracy. And like Lexi would have mentioned earlier, and even Desi hinted to it, when you look at the persons that you're about to elect, this is perhaps the most powerful moment we will have within the next 5 days or so to see the type of governance that we want to see at least for the next 5 years. I don't subscribe to these individuals being flawless, because we all make our mistakes, and sometimes we tend to get carried away thinking that these individuals are not going to make mistakes. But your character, the things that you do, how you represent yourself in public life at this point in time, and then you also have to look at the institutions that are backing them, because they're going to be reflective of the institutions that are supporting them. So what is your party politic like? Is it such that it shows signs of good governance within, or is it a case where you don't have that type of stability there, but you're looking at it, you're looking to bring it to the national level? All these are sort of internal questions that I think we as an individual, we within our parties, and we as a civil society need to start reflecting on, and not just reflecting on, but encouraging others to think about, because the more you have thinking along these lines is the more power you have when it goes to the ballot box, and you can effect the kind of change that you want to see. And if they're not doing good enough, then you move them again and you go again. That's the nature of our democracy as we have it now.
All right, Desi?
All right, so some of the things
Craig,
that
I'll come to you then.
I totally agree with both of you, because I did mention that I would have disagreed slightly with Lexi and, do I need to call you Leslie? And Bob. But Bob definitely looked at some of the more specific areas, and he mentioned bureaucratic red tape, which usually tips me off entirely when it comes to the design of our system as it relates to the public service design or methods, as well as the Constitution. So one of the things I've been advocating for, and as it relates to what is missing from our checks and balances, I really believe that what we have now is an outdated laws or Constitution. There are some things that we have in there that don't apply to our 21st century needs, and where we need to be going in the next 20 to 30, 40 years. So that's something we need to look into. And then the public service design and methods that we have, Bob alluded to it again. He talked about overpopulating the offices with persons affiliated with a certain affiliation as it relates to politics. And we really need to look at the way in which we appoint. We really need to, so it's entirely, I'm talking about reform. We need to go back to the drawing board. It's been 30-something years since we've transplanted our Constitution, as they would have taught us in social studies, because it was not entirely changed when we got it from outer spaces. So we need to look at what we need now, where we need to go, and restructure everything about the Constitution, not everything, but most things about the Constitution and most things about the public service that we don't like, that's not allowing us to have a greater output and to have those outcomes that we could see related to good governance. So that's definitely reform for me, redesigning the Constitution, redesigning the public service that we currently have is going to help us to make that change that we need to see to be able to activate the good governance agenda that we need to be, that we should be living by, as Bob said, to be able to have the development that we need along the lines. If we don't demand it, we're not going to get that performance that we are looking for. We're going to be talking about good governance for a long time until we address these situations.
Craig?
Yeah, well, there's so much that has transpired in this short 5 minutes. But first, let me say that we do not know of any of our supporters vandalizing any of the opposition's paraphernalia or branding, billboards, or the like. We have seen where some of our supporters, their own houses, I'm not even talking about the paraphernalia or the branding on the public lampposts. I'm talking about their homes being vandalized because of their political affiliation to the Team Unity administration. Is it that they themselves mark up their own houses and deface them? Is it that the own political party of that particular branding is doing it for themselves to try to score political points? I don't know. We don't know. But I'm saying to you now and to the general public, the Team Unity administration does not uphold the vandalizing of any persons or political parties' private property or branding. We, as the leadership, denounce such action, and we would like to encourage all parties and all supporters of all political parties to cease and desist, and let us make sure that we have free and fair elections. So I hope that has responded to that issue. In relation to what we can expect going forward, it is important for me to address. We as a party or as an administration do not appoint persons to positions based on their political affiliation. We appoint them based on their qualification. That is first and foremost. This Team Unity administration appoints persons to the executive of any, the executive branch or the agencies or the departments based on their qualifications and their tenure, not on their political association. Now, of course, there are going to be very sensitive positions that you will need to have someone who you can trust, someone who you can close your eyes and say, yes, we have promised this to the people in our social contract, and we need to ensure that this is implemented. We cannot deny the fact that, unfortunately, we have had in the past permanent secretaries or other persons in particular positions stalemating the progress of a government's project or policy. But rest assured that the Team Unity administration, in making sure that they follow its good governance agenda, we always appoint persons who are qualified, and not just qualified, highly qualified, and have tenure so that they can have mobile promotion in their particular department.
Well,
so I just want to say that.
Well, Craig, I think there are a few people who might disagree with you on that one, but like I said, it's open for people to have difference of opinions, and you have articulated your party's stance quite well. Well, Lexi, you wanted to...
Yes. Mr. Tuckett, since you spoke to the Team Unity Coalition's denunciation, so to speak, of the vandalism of political paraphernalia for any party, should we expect a public apology from the Prime Minister's nephew, where he was seen in a video with one of Dr. Douglas's lamppost placards dragging from the back of a rental vehicle he was driving?
Okay, we're not going to go into that.
It's a very honest question, because you just sat here as the deputy campaign director. That's what you said, correct? You just sat here and said that you're denouncing that sort of behavior on behalf of all three parties in Team Unity. And there's this video that has been out since last week where it's very clear what was being done and by whom it was being done. So I am honestly asking if the public can expect an apology, not from you. I would prefer an apology from any one of the political candidates, because they are the most influential in the movement. I'm asking if we should expect an apology from either of them for this sort of behavior, because it, as I said, it was very clear that it was one of their supporters.
Well, let me
actually, I don't think that this is not the forum. You've actually already said, Craig, you've actually already said that your party is not involved and you denounce it.
Yes.
So I remember why we are here.
Yes.
We are here to discuss the concept of good governance,
yes,
and this is a democratic panel.
Yes. But may I just say
maybe
one thing?
not. I don't know.
But may I say one thing? A part of the culture of our Caribbean politics during this time of campaigning is, I wouldn't say, there's no ill intent when you have those type of things, I've seen persons.
Craig, you can't say it's not ill intent and then say you denounce it.
Let me explain. Let me explain.
Okay.
Let me explain. Thank you. What I'm saying is, we have in our culture where we see persons taking T-shirts, making models of political leaders and dragging them behind, or even having them on top of their vehicles. I am saying that this, in a nutshell, is incorrect, it's wrong, it shouldn't be encouraged, right? In relation to our culture, the question is, as you rightly asked, are we ready for good governance? We have to do a lot more in educating our people, our supporters. For instance, we were supposed to be following social distancing, wearing masks, but yet we see in motorcades, we are unable to, as leaders, I'm sure they would have told them, hopefully, to even make sure that our supporters adhere to the rules. So it's a cultural thing that we have to learn and have to try to educate our people to reach to that point.
I
But
see what you're saying as contradictory, but that's my opinion. Bob?
I'd like to say again, I reiterate my point, that the Team Unity administration and the leaders, we have denounced such action. In relation to what was asked, these persons who are seen as in terms of videos will have to answer for that themselves. And so are other persons who do the same thing.
So Lexi, you got your answer. Can we hear from Bob now?
Okay, so let me just, I know with taking that segue into consideration, let me just bring it back to good governance and some of the other suggestions that we can make to improve our governance as we go along. Waste. Waste is a big thing. There's too much wastage going on where some persons have a lot and some persons don't have enough. The only way we can reduce waste is, again, by putting the necessary systems in place to ensure persons are held accountable for what they are put in charge of. So like the Public Accounts Committee, these are committees that allow the opposition to see how the government's money, or have a visualization at least, as to how the government is spending the people's money. And they can critique, offer more information as it's presented to them. So that's something, again, that we need to see given the necessary teeth, so that no government, no matter who is elected or re-elected in this instance, is allowed free rein to spend our taxpayers' money as they please. Transparency and open government, where governments need to be more available and take criticism a bit better, in the sense that you are holding the highest positions in the land. And I'm not referring to just one administration. If you looked at the COVID responses, let's say, for example, of all Caribbean governments, there's a bit of a, let's just say, it angers persons in administration when they are questioned on how they're doing what they're doing. But yet we still hear everybody say, this is the first time we've managed this. So if you want me to appreciate the fact that you're dealing with something for the first time, then you also appreciate that we are going through something for the first time as well. So we are going to ask questions sometimes which will not make sense to you. We're going to have issues that you're not going to understand. So do not, instead of taking it as us attacking you, and this, again, this has not to do with one particular administration, because most administrations tended to respond very angrily when they were questioned as to how even in New York, you watched President Trump in the United States of America.
Executive order on Twitter. So,
you know, he goes off, you know.
Yeah.
So, it's about a culture that we need to sort of do away with. And in St. Kitts and Nevis, we can grow beyond that. We can say, well, okay, I may not agree with you, but I will take into consideration what your concerns are. And as a responsible administration, that's what I would like to see going forward. Persons who are a bit more open to criticism, open and responsive when persons have concerns. I mentioned the justice system, I think, is also something that we need to really... There's this old adage where it's one of my favorites, where it says justice must not just be done, but must be seen to be done. Mm-hmm. This is very, very important in maintaining public order. Because if it is that the general public sees you are managing the justice system in a way that's different for a small man as opposed to somebody else who is not as small, then they lose confidence in these systems. Once they lose that confidence, then you're talking about anarchy. Because now they're not going to have the faith necessary to believe in when you go up and say, as a judge or whatever position you may hold within the justice system, this is the law and this is what it should be and this is supposed to be fair across the board. So we need to have that justice reform, whether it's the delay in the courts, whether it's the equal application of the law and the rule of law across the board for every person. These are areas in which I think any administration, but primarily now because we're anticipating an election coming up within the next few days, these are areas I think they need to focus on so as they can be seen as attempting at the very least to practice good governance at all levels of government, executive, judicial, and otherwise.
Okay. Well, Baba, I think you have tied in very nicely the sorts of issues that people should be concerned of. And one of the objectives that we have at the show, like I mentioned earlier, is for people to be presented with information and differing opinions. We have very strong ones. We have varying opinions, but we feel like it's important in increasing people's knowledge of a topic that they get as many sides as possible. So we've had a lot of comments, and I really want to thank all the persons who have been commenting on the live. We have so many, and I think we won't be able to get into all of them. And we always are appreciative of the fact that you continue to participate. And this was one of the topics that came from somebody who has been viewing the show and thought that they don't understand what is this whole concept of good governance and what does it mean? Like, why is it such a thing lately? So hopefully that listener and others would have a clearer opinion on a clearer understanding of what good governance is. So with that being said, we have actually run out of time a bit. So I'll ask our panelists to just give some final thoughts. Craig, we could start with you and make our way down.
All right. Okay, well, let me take this on. Thank you very much. Again, I must thank the organizers of Alarm Clock for allowing me the opportunity to come on and to share my not just my views per se, but also the Team Unity Administration's views as relates to good governance and to articulate their position as to their performance for the past 5 years. We continue to ensure that the good governance agenda is indeed attained. It's not going to be attained in short 5 years. Some have not been able to do it in 20 years or even before that. But we are doing what we know we can do, and we do that with the support of all of the good people of St. Kitts and Nevis. And so with that being said, we would like to ask again the good people of St. Kitts and Nevis to continue doing the right thing, making yourself educated as relates to good governance, and then from there we can only have a safer, stronger, and brighter future for St. Kitts and Nevis.
Okay. Desi?
All right, so as we wrap up, I want to reinforce my point. I'm going to use the word reinforce again, that we hold up our end of the bargain as citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis and ensure that as a part of that mutually reinforceable agreement, that social contract that we have with the government, that we demand accountability, that we increase, not just demand our for accountability, but also to vote and increase your participation as a citizen so that you could be able to see that good governance agenda play out. If we don't demand accountability, we don't vote or increase our activities, we are not going to be able to get the results that we so desire. We're going to talk about it, but we have to do something about it.
Lexi?
Yes, and thank you once again, Jihan and Desi, for having me on Alarm Clock today. And Before I go, I would just like to emphasize the importance of paying attention to a person's character during this time, this very tense, very hyped season, election season that we have here. Because as I stated before, my view is that a person's character and their behavior, how they conduct themselves, it's a very, very strong indication of what their control over your life, so to speak, will look and feel like for the next 5 years. Fairness, justice, equity, ethical conduct, these are all things that we should look at in a person before we make our decision come Friday.
Good point.
Thank you.
Very good point.
Thanks again, Gian, Desi, for having me on. It's been a very informative meeting. In fact, just researching this, as I said, was very informative even in of itself. As it relates to good governance, I really hope our listeners have understood where we're coming from. And, I mean, we tend to use all of these big words, but it's just about, I like to simplify it this way. If you have a business, whether it be selling limes because you've got lime trees, who do you want to sell those lime trees for you? I mean, those limes for you. Who do you want to take charge? And what are the characteristics you are looking for? And these are the type of things that we look for when it comes to good governance. And I say in closing that we can't just, even from this perspective, rely on the state alone. It has to be civil society, it has to be the private sector, it has to be the policemen, the teachers, it has to be you and I whom demand it of ourselves, and then by extension demand it of the persons whom we want to lead, because that's what good governance is about, even within our little small institutions, and then it blossoms as we go up. And then hopefully, it's as Craig indicated, it's not a race for the swift, but it's to be done properly. And it's all in an intention to come to that, closer to that perfect democracy that we all want to see, where everybody is participating and everybody could benefit, maybe not equally, but benefit, and they could feel like they enjoy being part and parcel of the entire democratic process, or in this instance, political process, whether or not they vote one way or the other. So I would encourage your listeners to do their research and make the demands, ask questions where possible of their political leaders, and in whatever way and form they can, contribute to this becoming a more complete state, a more perfect democracy, by playing their part in bringing good governance.
Thank you so much, Bob. And I just want to let you know, I just want to let the people who are listening know that when we started the show today, Bob was very nervous. he was scared. He was scared of the panel, but Bob, I just want to let you know the listeners are loving you. So you see, you had no reason to be nervous. We told you that. You have no reason to be nervous. But just to say again, thank you to the panelists for coming this afternoon, to giving up some of your holiday to talk about all boring things of politics and governance and good governance and bad governance. Now we don't see it as boring, but you know, some people do, and we really want to make sure that people understand that governance affects every single thing they do, from the road you drive on to the when you go to a government office to do a process. Every single thing is affected in your daily life by the way the country is governed. And what we tried to do here today was just to give you some insight into what the things you should look for when you talk about good governance. So we thank Craig especially for the points and the participation. Do you feel like you have enough space within the political sphere or the governance sphere to speak up? And a big part of speaking up too is to speak up without reproach. To be respectful, of course, but you should be able to freely express your dissatisfaction or express your pleasure with the way things are going. Do you feel like we are governed in a way where our leaders are being held accountable? When there are allegations of bad doing, what can we do about that? Do you feel like there's enough space for that? And of course, if you do feel like there's enough space for that, then your grade would be, like Craig, you might give the government an A+ as being a government that is big on accountability. That's what accountability is. Transparency. Do we have access to information? Can we know how much money was spent on a project? These sorts of information, do we feel like we are being involved enough in decision making? Efficiency. How do we feel about the way our government departments are run? Are they efficient enough? Does it take too long to do something? Is it too much paperwork? Or you're satisfied with, the way that things are improving with the introduction of a lot of e-services? You think about these kind of things. Think about how do you feel? So that's what good governance is. How do you feel about the way the country is being governed? You give them your grade. Everybody looks at things differently. Some people value other things more than other things. So based on your own perception and your own value system, how do you feel about governance? And hopefully the information you've gotten here this afternoon helps you to make a clearer decision. So what's your grade? And hopefully on Friday, when you go to vote, that will come into play when you decide to choose whoever you want to vote for. Just to say as well, we thank Craig as the deputy chairperson for the People's Labour Party, and of course mention to everyone who is listening that our goal is not to promote any political party, but to give people the direct access. We had direct access to a deputy chairperson of a party here today, and people were able to post their thoughts and feelings about things that he was saying. So we really want to give you that kind of access. So Alarm Clock is trying to do their part in good governance. So
good job.
We want to make sure that we remain a platform that is open to everybody, so that people can have that information. We are open to people who don't align with any political party, but you just feel very strongly about issues of politics and governance. So that's what the show is about. We are trying to do one more show before elections. Should I say what the show is going to be about? Yeah, so we're aiming for one more show. I'm watching our technician.
Shaking the head.
We'll see. I know you're tired, but we'll make sure we reward you as best as we can. I hope you like to get paid in food, right? Because that's as much as we could afford to give you. But yeah, so we're trying to do one more show where we will have a panel that will be comparing the manifestos of the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party and the Team Unity Manifesto.
Which launches tonight.
It launches tonight?
Yes.
Thank you. So that's what we were waiting on. We were waiting to hear when it would be launched so that we could actually get a copy and sit down and do the comparative work.
You can also get a copy on teamunity2020.com.
Teamunity2020.com.
Yes.
Okay, so it's already there?
Well, I would say by tonight.
By tonight. Okay, so tomorrow morning, guys, so the Team Unity manifesto will be out. The St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party manifesto has been released. If you go on their Facebook page, St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party, you can find it there. There is also an app that you can download to get the app, the manifesto in that form as well. I'm sorry I don't have the precise details in terms of, yeah, and the constituency offices as well.
Yes.
So Craig, you'll have hard copies as well?
Yes, we'll have hard copies.
Okay, so we want to make sure that people have the information to make sure that they make a decision that is well informed. We are also open to getting the manifestos from the parties in Nevis. We have a panelist who is from Nevis, so of course it would be nice to have that discussion for persons in Nevis as well. So manifesto show will be coming up next. Desi has been trying to convince me into an elections watch. I like sleep. So I like to wake up in the morning and hear what the news is. So we'll see about that. But we're here and we're trying to break down the information. We're trying to sift out a lot of the flowers of that politics usually adds. So I see somebody NRP has an outline of plans. Not sure about CCM. Okay. Well, we'll follow. We'll follow. We're on it.
Also, our candidates have a constituency manifesto as well.
Also, each one has
correct.
Yes, I think someone sent me a link to that one. So Team Unity candidates have constituency plans.
That's
so the one that's coming out is the country plan. Okay, so guys, you have the information. And we are happy that you stayed with us for the time. And we're here. And again, if there's any other topic or suggestion that you want us to delve into, we will do our best to do that. For persons who are asking, we got messages, people are asking if this is a show that's going to continue past elections. Yes, it was never intended to be about the elections. Elections just happened to drop when we decided to do the first show. So we're here because we recognize that it's an important conversation to be had, and we're not having these discussions, especially as young people, to understand politics and understand governance. And when you hear anything about an injunction and you don't understand what it means, we're going to call GAT. And we'll call other lawyers. And I know a lot of people have really attached themselves to GAF. So when you have those topics, any kind of topic, once we have access to people who know about it and you want us to help you break it down into the simplest language, that's what we're here for. So with that, thanks again to the panelists. Thanks again for everybody who has been listening. Thanks again to ZIZ for allowing us use of their studio to film this show. And see you sometime soon after we get a chance to compare the manifestos, but before Friday for elections.
Yes.
So with that, we're signing out. And remember, alarm clock, wake up or rise up.